Hi, I'm Jacqueline.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
Welcome to part two of this episode. Welcome to our
hmm
first bi-weekly episode. So hopefully you guys did not miss us too much last week.
Yeah, hopefully not. But maybe you're still catching up on previous episodes, you
That's
know?
true. That's true. You haven't even noticed that we're doing every other.
I mean, yeah, we have a large back catalog. So, like, if
Yeah,
someone is like first starting out, that is pretty daunting to
there's a lot
undertake.
to
There's a
go
lot
through.
there.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I'm pretty proud of us. It's pretty impressive. Um,
Yeah.
we could also just be like the office ladies and run out of content and be like, well, we're just gonna do it all over again. We'll start back at episode one. Like, what are you
Well, do
doing?
you listen to those episodes?
No,
They have like a 5-minute banter at the beginning, and then it's the old episode again.
really? That's it?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Just gotta
So, because I
monetize
listened
every
to
cent I
one,
can out of that. Like, you
yeah.
do you girls. I'm not, but I'm not gonna
Yeah.
listen.
Yeah. Well, basically I play it and I listen to like because they'll be
hmm
like, "Oh, we didn't talk about this. We didn't talk about this." All right, and then they go into the thing. So I'll listen to that like 5 minutes and then just skip
Yeah.
it because I'm like, I don't want to re-listen, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's not like a whole new thing.
I thought it was interesting that they're like, what are we gonna do? Okay, let's just start back at the beginning. Oh, okay.
They are this week, they said deep diving like a super fan episode because there's like the
Okay.
super fan episodes on
hmm
Peacock. I don't really know what those are. Like I don't know if they're just like deleted scenes
Interesting.
in
Yeah.
there. Not sure, but they're doing that for like an episode, whatever episode they re-released. But
hmm
yeah, it's just 5 minutes at the beginning of them like talking about, oh, we didn't mention
This
blah blah
other
blah.
specific thing.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well,
So
more power to them. Like you go ahead if that's working for you. You're
they making that money.
exactly. Also forgot kind of that we were recording this podcast the last couple of minutes. Like we do, where we just start
Yeah.
talking and then we're like, oh yeah, there are people listening to us right now. It's not just
Yeah.
us.
Oopsie. Hello. You
Yep.
guys are back.
Yep. We don't have any updates because we are recording this literally 5 minutes after recording part one. And part
hmm
one was recorded 2 months after our last episode. So we didn't have any updates then because there were too many, and now there's not enough.
There
So,
was, now it's going to be very, not irrelevant, but it will be long past. That I did mean to bring an update is that there was another school shooting this
yes.
week.
Yeah.
Um,
In
Mad
Wisconsin?
Madison,
Yeah.
Wisconsin, and I think, I don't know, I saw two different things on, I know two people died. In one article I saw it was like a teacher and a student, but another I saw it was like two young kids. So
Yeah.
I don't know, but the shooter was actually a teenage girl, which is kind of
hmm
rare. So I know that's probably getting a little bit more news, but again, just heartbreaking.
Yeah. Just way too many and way too often, as we talk about, feels like every damn week. Also,
hmm
kind of old news at this point, but I'm sure it's still going to be relevant. But the murder of, I can't remember his name, the United Healthcare guy.
Brian Walsh? Did I pull that out my ass?
I don't know. Did you? Let's fact check.
Brian Thompson. I was
Okay.
close.
Close.
I was close.
Close. But yeah, so that was wild and
Yeah, the whole like I don't know, the whole Luigi thing is like
hmm
wild. And first off, that his name is Luigi. Like, what is happening? What is happening?
Yeah.
It's wild. But yeah, those were two, yeah, pretty big things that were kind of happening. Obviously, the whole P. Diddy thing is still all coming out.
Yes. Yep.
Now it seems like they're taking down a lot of other people in Hollywood too. So I who knows what's going on with that. I also just looked at the calendar to see this episode is getting released the day after the inauguration.
Oh,
So I
oh.
know we talked about it last week, but um
Like my whole body just like deflated when
yeah,
you said that. I was like,
yeah.
oh,
But to
we'll be
try to
in
be
that time.
timely on our episodes, just kind of wanted to acknowledge that and that
hmm
kind of everything we said. Look for the helpers. We're gonna find ways to rally together. We're gonna find ways to help people. We got this. We got this.
Yes. And then it just means that the countdown to those 4 years being over has begun. So we're
Yeah.
day one of how many days
Yeah.
are in 4 years. We can do this, guys.
Yeah. We can do it. We can do it. At the moment, we still do have it. You can't, as president, just like enact something. It has to go through stuff. And I've seen
As of
some kind of
now.
hopeful thing as of now. That's what I'm saying, as of now. But I was seeing some things about even though like the House and Senate are both Republican at the moment, he is appointing a lot of people like from the House into cabinet positions, and those
Hmm,
positions aren't like refilled until the next thing. So the
interesting.
margin
Okay.
of like votes you have to get things passed
Hmm.
narrows. So they have to have like complete 100% support from every Republican in the House, which is like
Mm.
rare to happen
Yeah.
and all that. So I don't want to be
Especially
too
for
hopeful,
some of
but
these more extreme things that he claims he's going to
yeah,
try to do.
because even though not all Republicans are MAGA, like they're not all
Hmm.
bad, like some
Yeah,
of them are
definitely.
very moderate. So
Hmm.
there are some things that certain Republicans will not vote on, probably. So
And hopefully there are a lot of things that he was just putting out there to get votes from like-minded individuals that
all I'm
hopefully he's not actually going
saying,
to do.
he says he has a soft spot for TikTok. Let's save TikTok, okay?
Courtney's like, the important issues up front. Okay.
How am I gonna cook dinner? I'm not kidding. All of my likes are just recipe videos. My favorite TikTok sound though is if TikTok is such a threat and the Chinese government has all of my data, why are they just trying to convince me to read fairy smut? Because it did. That's what
Oh
happened.
God.
I got a
Yep.
new skincare routine. I started reading fairy smut. That's what the Chinese government
Look
wants
where
from me.
TikTok has brought us?
Anyway, just thought I'd bring
Okay.
that out. But
Yes.
we'll remain realistic but optimistic.
Yep.
And then we're gonna get into a shitty episode.
Here we
Not
go.
shitty episode, but shitty
Yes.
person.
Yes.
All right. So if you remember where we left off in part one, we were talking about in early 1997 in the greater Nashville area. There was someone who they deemed the fast food killer who was attacking different fast food stores, robbing and murdering the employees there. And that from another crime, they believe they found the suspect of Paul Dennis Reid Jr. So we'll go ahead and talk about him a little bit more. So, Paul Dennis Reid Jr. was born in Texas. His mother, Josephine Mary, who went by Joni, was reportedly abusive and tough. She moved out at 16 and went to Chicago to follow a boyfriend. That relationship did not end well, and she moved to Fort Worth, Texas, where she met Paul Reid Sr. And Paul was working as a security officer and private investigator. Um, and Paul Sr. worked a lot to make ends meet, but when he wasn't working, he was usually drinking. The time old tale. Um, so Paul and Joni had three kids: Linda, who was born in 1952, Janet, who was born in 1955, and Paul Jr., who was born on November 12th, 1957. Paul had a malformation on his left ear at birth, and doctors later wondered if this could have like indicated also some brain damage on his left temporal lobe. Like he always had poor hearing in that ear, but they don't actually know how far that malformation or that damage went into his brain. So Paul and Joni divorced in 1960, and before and after the divorce, the home was very unstable and turbulent. Paul Jr. ended up having a developmental delay. He was about 5 to 9 months behind, like on most milestones. And Paul Sr. actually got custody of Paul Jr. and Linda, and Joni got custody of Janet because she could not afford to keep all three kids. It's like that wild time where you could just like split up your kids, I guess.
Right. Like you take these, I'll take these. Okay, good luck.
All right, have fun. Um, Joni eventually married a man named Danny Morez, and they had two more children, Karen and Monica. Paul Sr. was not a stable person at all. He was an alcoholic, and he often dropped Paul Jr. and Linda off at his mother's house. Paul Jr. had a lot of energy and was usually always just into something, and he would slowly start stealing stuff from like neighbors' mailboxes and clotheslines. I mean, I feel like classic latchkey kid with like a lot of energy, no direction, acting out. all of this.
Yeah.
And he was actually only 4 years old when he stole a purse at a grocery store. And then at the age of 5, he set his grandmother's bed on fire with her in it.
Okay, we're escalating a little bit. Escalating
A little
just a little
bit.
bit.
He also killed her dog. So,
Oh.
yeah. Some say he was doing this as a cry for help. Others say he was just mean from the day he was born. So it kind of just depends, I guess, who you ask. Paul Jr. would destroy other children's toys. He would try to throw things at other people to like try and like hurt them. Paul did not start school until he was 7 years old when a stepmother enrolled him because she was like, I think this kid's supposed to be going to school.
I think
Um,
this is the age we typically do this, right? Let's put
yeah,
him somewhere.
yeah. He had a hard time in school, and a school psychologist said he was suffering from minimal cerebral dysfunction. So. Paul Sr. didn't really know what to do with Paul Jr. and eventually just sent him to Burnett Baylor's boys' home in Houston when he was 8 years old. It was a home for children who were a potential menace to society. So obviously, he kind of had a history of doing some crazy stuff, even at 8 years old. And Paul Jr. also seemed to have a history of head injuries. At 5, he was hit in the back of his head with a brick that another kid threw at him. At 12, he got a mini bike for Christmas and he wrecked it, fracturing his skull. And he was also later in a car accident and his head hit the windshield. So if you remember like the McDonald triangle, we have you know, um head trauma, we have hurting animals, we have
Hmm.
arson, we have I don't know about bedwetting, but who knows?
Would not be surprised at this point with the way things are going for
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, and he already kind of had a possible brain like damage from birth, and now he's
Hmm.
having multiple times hitting his head, fracturing his skull, all of that.
Yeah.
So once Joni found out that he was at Burnett Baylor Boys Home, she came to get him because she was like, "You just sent my kid off to boarding school, basically. Thanks, dude." And he changed his name to Paul Leon Merez, but never like legally changed it. He just kind of like socially took the new stepdad's last name. Paul said he was in 4-H from 9 to 16, and he was in Little League Baseball, played basketball, and was on the swim team. He was inspired by bodybuilder Jack Lalani and decided to lift weights and work out instead of like drinking or smoking. And all throughout his life, he like always had a gym membership. Like he was very much like, I want to be fit, I want to work out. Like this is my driving force. Doctors at some point did put him on Equinol, which is a psychoactive medicine, and his behavior did show some improvement for a few months. Joni actually ended up eventually divorcing Danny Merez, and she was a manager at an exclusive Houston restaurant and got Paul Jr. a job there at the age of 12. Joni remarried in 1971, but Paul did not like this man. His sisters did later say they were sexually abused by a stepfather, but never officially named which stepfather. Paul ended up having a lot of charges as a juvenile, auto theft, simple assault, and at 16, Paul was actually kicked out of his mother's house after attempting to sexually assault his sisters and his mother. So she came and got him, but then was like, okay, you can't stay here. So Paul went to live with his father and dropped out of school. Paul also claims he was in a relationship from 1975 to 1977 with a rich married woman and said they had a planned pregnancy together. Don't know if this is true or not, but
Also, I'm sorry to backtrack. I'm not gonna lie. I am pumping right now and I'm a little distracted. But do- he attempted to sexually assault his mother.
hmm
I'm like, I'm sitting here thinking, like, after you said that, and I was like, have we ever heard of that in a case? Because
I don't think so.
other than Ed, no, yes, other than Ed Kemper, once she was deceased, but I don't think while still alive, I've ever heard of that,
Yeah.
with their
I mean,
mother.
I've heard of like inappropriate like relations with mothers, but not
Yes,
like the mother being like,
not a
you have to
forceful,
leave.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 Wow. Okay, sorry to interrupt you. My brain took a minute to
No,
catch up there.
no, you're fine. Again, like Paul.
Oh
Again, like
God.
I do think Paul was maybe failed some in his childhood, but I also
Hmm.
think this is one of those cases where you're like, are you just like born mean? Like you're
Yeah.
5 years old and setting a bed on fire with your grandmother in it. Like that
Something is wrong with
is
you
extreme.
very internally. Yeah.
Yeah. So Paul eventually got his GED in 1977, and Paul was a security guard in July 1979 when he met Jessica Neal, and he proposed to her in December 1979. They married in August of 1980 and honeymooned in Corpus Christi, and Paul was reportedly abusive to Jessica. And like some friends would even recall he would like lock her in the house and like would not let her like would take the phone off the wall when he left, like would not let her have like any outside contact with the world, like very, very abusive. And to the surprise of no one, Paul's crimes continued into adulthood. He continued to steal, and he was also charged with check forgery, but it was dismissed when the checks were paid. And he eventually teamed up with his childhood best friend, Stuart Cook. Stuart would frequently commit burglary and robbery, and they robbed many restaurants and stores together, which is a kind of telling thing when you think about how he's robbing stores in the future. And in 1982, Paul was charged with robbing four restaurants and a hardware store, and he was found competent to stand trial. And Jessica filed divorce papers in 1984. He was convicted on April 16th, 1984, and received a 20-year prison sentence. Paul wrote a lot of letters in prison to his sisters, the judge and prosecutors, many other people, and most were just filled with nonsense. Like, if you want like way, 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 way more info about everybody and everything, definitely go read the book. It's on Kindle Unlimited if you want to read it. It was like very detailed, but she had like excerpts of like some of these letters, but it's just like gibberish, just like nonsense. Stuart Cook had also been charged and convicted in the robberies. He was paroled in 1988 and had no desire to see Paul again, and he's trying to stay out of trouble. So Paul was given parole in January 1990, and he was not released due to good behavior or the belief that he was not a threat to society, but because of prison overcrowding. So that's the only reason he was released. Um, Paul was to stay at a Salvation Army halfway house in Fort Worth. He got a job driving a truck and hauling loads of textile products, which I'm like, why are you letting this man get in a truck and drive all around? That's not the job I think I would want
Yeah.
someone fresh out of prison.
Maybe not the best job for him.
Yeah. And on November 24th, 1990, he got in a wreck, and Paul was on workers' comp until 1992, and he actually received a $25,000 settlement from it, which is like $60,000 today. That's a lot of money. And after this, he got braces, a nose job, his ears pinned back, an expensive chemical peel to strip away acne and acne scars. So he had a whole cosmetic makeover.
Oh, is getting your ears pinned back a thing? Is that common?
I know someone who actually did.
Oh,
Yeah, so I guess like if your ears stick out more and like you're
okay.
self-conscious about it, there's a procedure that you can get them
Oh,
like pinned back.
interesting. I
Yeah,
never
my
thought
sister
about
dated
that.
a guy who got his ears pinned back.
Oh,
So, yeah,
okay.
that's the only reason I knew it existed. I didn't know they were doing chemical peels in the 90s though.
Ahead of his time.
Skincare, it never changes, it just comes back.
Very true.
I don't I don't want to know what was in that chemical peel though in the 90s. Oh my God, no.
No,
It probably
no.
they did say like he kind of looked glossy, like weird. Like he looked different after. Like it was like obviously like his face just never really looked right after it. So he wanted to be a famous country singer and wanted to make sure he looked the right way. And in February 1992, his parole was changed from monthly check-ins to yearly check-ins, and he was free to travel and live in any state. So Paul stayed in Fort Worth with a woman named Dorothy Medlin. He would cook for her, help her if she needed anything, and even called her like mom and said he was like she was like a surrogate mother to him. And he worked with her son at a gas station that her husband owned. And if Paul was left alone, he would write down like every transaction and like show him in the money in the register when he came back. So he's like, he would write down like person came in and bought a Coke, 50 cents, like person did this, whatever, and like show him the money. And in 1993, Paul moved to Chicago and he tried singing at a small country and western bar. Didn't work out. He moved back to Texas in either 1994 or 1995. And when he came back, he wrote a 13-page letter about how the government was controlling his mind and making him do things. And he made copies and like mailed it to people and then just like handed it out to people on the streets.
Very
So,
normal behavior here.
yeah, yeah. Um, Paul eventually moved to Oklahoma City to attend a school of music and started working at a bakery. And he even made a few demo tapes and purchased an expensive guitar. He did meet Carolyn Mast, which I do believe is a fake name, but they moved in together and had plans to marry. Carolyn found his parole papers and asked him about it, and he said he was wrongfully convicted and under government surveillance. So it's like, oh, okay. Carolyn noticed that Paul had a temper. He would actually like physically hold her down on the couch and like stuff a pillow over her face. Trigger warning, animal torture. He also threw her kitten across the room in anger one time. Yeah. So she broke off the engagement. She was like, I'm good. You're gonna leave. And there's also a rumor he left Oklahoma when Carolyn accused him of molesting her 5-year-old daughter. So, in addition to abusive,
Ugh.
all of these red flags, you know, we
Yeah.
have no convictions, but a lot of accusations of sexual assault by Paul. So Paul moved to Nashville in September 1995 to try and become a singer. He started working at Shoney's in October, and coworkers said he was calm and never showed signs of a temper. He also didn't talk about like the government mind control. Like people were like, "No, he never said he was being controlled by the government to me." In March 1996, Paul said he had to go to Texas for a while, and he asked his manager if he'd be hired back when he returned, and they said yes. So he only returned to Texas for like a short time and filed for bankruptcy. He stayed with an ex-girlfriend, but she did ask him to leave in December 1996. And he had accusations from his sister that he molested her daughters, aged 4 and 6, around this time. So he goes back to Texas, and now the sister is like, he's also doing this to my children. So again, a lot of accusations here. I'm sure they're true. He returned to Nashville on New Year's Eve in 1997, and in January, he enrolled at Volunteer State Community College and had a 1988 Ford Escort station wagon.
So there was a Shoney's manager who had worked briefly with Paul who was found stabbed to death in the Shoney's office on January 20th, 1997. The money had been removed from the safe, but there was no evidence. His death was investigated but never closed. So Paul had falsified all of his documents to change his year of birth, so that's why none of these charges came up when he was originally investigated after the Captain D's murders. Paul kept trying to do auditions for music and went by the stage name Justin Parks. Paul also mentioned robbery multiple times as like a way to get rich quick, and he eventually bought two 25 automatic handguns in February. He had a 32 caliber but didn't like the way it shot, so he went out and bought the new ones. And Steve Hampton and Sarah Jackson's murders were announced on February 16th, and many coworkers said Paul seemed very upset about it. When the sketch came out, many coworkers agreed that it looked like Paul, but they thought that he was too nice to be able to do something like that. So clearly they did not know Paul very well.
No.
Paul went on a shopping spree on February 17th and 18th, and on February 19th, he bought a 1997 candy apple red Ford Escort. He sold his old 1988 Ford Escort, and on February 27th, he did end up showing his temper one day at Shoney's when he threw a dish at another employee. She was found crying, and he was told to clock out and leave permanently. In May of 1997, Paul Sr. died. Paul Jr. showed up in a striped short-sleeved shirt, lime green shorts, socks pulled up to his calves, tennis shoes, and a gold cardboard crown from Burger King. When his sister asked what he was doing, he only said, "I am King Paul." They begged him to change, but he refused. Clearly, this guy's got a lot of mental things
Yeah,
going
like
on.
those little cardboard crowns from Burger King. Like
Hmm.
imagine showing up in the rest of the outfit also to like your father's funeral. And you're like,
Yeah,
I'm King Paul. I'm not changing.
yeah.
Nope.
Eventually, Paul tried to get his job back at Shoney's. He went to the manager's house and like begged him to take him back. He then told him that he had proof his employees were stealing from him. He said he had it in his trunk and asked him to follow him. So the manager started to get a bad feeling, and something clicked when he saw the red car and remembered the fast food killer drives a red car. So he tried to walk back to the house, and Paul pulled a gun on him. Paul threatened to shoot him if he didn't get in the car, but he did run back into the house. The manager yelled to his wife to get the gun, but he was just bluffing, but Paul bought it and ran off. He called the police, but Paul had left by that time, and Paul called to apologize when the police were there, and the manager convinced Paul to come back to the house. So Paul was arrested for assault. He gave a false date of birth, and Jose, who was the survivor of the McDonald's attacks, was looking through photo lineups and selected Paul Reed's photo as the killer. Paul's fingerprints were taken, and they were able to positively identify a partial fingerprint to Steve Hampton's movie card. He was interviewed for 8 hours, and nothing came of it, but police are certain that they officially have the fast food killer in jail. Police start notifying the victims' families. Reid had a court hearing and was sentenced to be held in jail without bond. Jose attended some of the court hearings and would have a physical reaction seeing him and was very scared, even in this courtroom with people and furniture between them, which I feel like is to be expected. Like he stabbed you 17 times. Like,
Yeah, and just having that like body response. And they said
yeah.
like even when he was like going through pictures and like saw Paul Reed's pictures, it was like obvious, like his whole demeanor changed where he's like, it's
Mm-hmm.
this guy.
Yeah. A pair of white tennis shoes were taken from his home and tested, and one shoe had a DNA sample that matched the DNA profile of Angie Holmes. So blood from the other shoe was taken, and it was determined that neither Angie Holmes nor Michelle Mace could be excluded as a match to the profile. A warrant was issued to search Paul's car. The vehicle was very clean, almost too clean. Fibers were taken from the car, and 3 of them were found to be consistent with Angie's clothing. Fibers found on Michelle's clothing and shoes were consistent with fibers from the back seat, carpet, and edge of the back seat, and there were 11 fibers that matched one source, which was apparently rare, and Paul also fit the physical description from all witnesses for the Captain D's murder. So,
And I feel like in like the 90s too, like DNA and like physical matching and stuff. So for them to have like 11 fibers matching one source, like in the
yeah.
90s, they're like, we've never had more proof of
Yeah, they're
anything in
like, we
our
have a
lives.
lot
Like,
of evidence
this
going on
is,
here.
yeah.
hmm On April 12th, 1999, the trial for the Captain D murders began. So jurors were selected from Knoxville and brought in by a bus. They were paid $10 a day plus meals and hotel rooms. And a local news station ran a live coverage of the murders, and it was the first time in Tennessee that a trial was covered via live satellite. Judge Cheryl Blackburn presided, and the evidence we mentioned above was presented, including all of the witness statements, testimony from statements Paul had made, the autopsies, and all of the other evidence. On April 20th, the jury was ready to give their verdict, and Paul was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, 2 counts of first-degree felony murder, and 1 count of especially aggravated robbery. The families were able to give their victim impact statements, and Paul was sentenced to death for both crimes. His execution date was set for April 29th, 2003, and he would be the 101st person on Tennessee's death row, but the last execution was in 1960. The trial for the Baskin-Robbins murder began on September 11th, 1999. The jurors for this one had been selected from Memphis and sequestered in. They were paid the same as the Knoxville jurors from the first trial, and a lot was very similar to the first trial with it being televised on local TVs, but this trial probably had the best evidence. So this is the one, remember, with the fibers, the DNA, potential witnesses, and on September 22nd, Paul Reed was found guilty of murdering Angie and Michelle, and he received 2 more death sentences, so now totaling 4. On May 22nd, 2000, the trial began for the murders and attempted murder at the McDonald's. Jose testified and identified Paul Reed as the man who murdered his coworkers. Jose testified how Paul pointed a gun at his head and fired, but nothing came out. He also showed his multiple scars from the attack. And on May 25th, Paul was convicted of 3 counts of premeditated murder, 3 counts of felony murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 1 count of especially aggravated robbery. The jury voted for 3 more death sentences for the murders of Ronald, Robert, and Andrea, and Paul now had 7 death sentences. He was
Which I
sent,
wonder, like, what's the record for most amount of death sentences
right?
for a
Like,
person? I'm like, you have 7.
yeah, that's a very large
But like,
number for that.
yeah, but like, I mean, throw the book at him. I get it. Because you're
Yeah,
like, we're gonna make sure that, okay, you get the first trial, those 2 off. Well, you still got 5 more waiting for you.
exactly. Make sure you are going nowhere. He was sent to Riverbend Prison. Numerous days of execution were filed. Some argued that Paul Reed was mentally ill and should not be killed. And the victims' families kept like having to prepare for the execution, only to discover that it had been pushed back again. So it's like you get to that point where you're like, okay, here it comes. You have a
Mm-hmm.
date, and then it keeps getting pushed back.
Yeah.
Paul eventually gave up his post-conviction relief attempts. His sister, Linda Martiniano, did try to continue as Paul's next friend. She tried to file petitions that Paul was incompetent to stand trial, but the Supreme Court did not agree. For a while, Paul was a suspect in the Brown's Chicken Massacre in Palatine, Illinois, but his alibi was confirmed, and Juan Luna and James Degorski were later convicted of those crimes. There was
Which I feel
also,
like I need to cover now because I'm
yeah,
like,
we'll just
we haven't
hit
talked
them
about
all.
that one.
Yep.
So,
We'll add it to the list. There was also a 1980 bowling alley murder and robbery in Houston, Texas, that many wonder if Paul had a part in. Another man was convicted, and a judge ruled that there was not sufficient evidence to link Reid to this crime. It is believed that there are possibly many unsolved crimes that Reid could be linked to. He was eventually transferred to Brushy Mountain Penitentiary, and when Brushy Mountain closed, he was transferred to Morgan County Correctional Complex. In the last few weeks of October 2013, Paul Reid was admitted to the hospital with a severe case of pneumonia. And on November 1st, 2013, Paul succumbed to chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and pneumonia and was pronounced dead. And he was 55 years old.
which like crazy, he was so young, like committing these murders also,
Yeah.
like when you think about it. But like, I know a lot of what I heard from the victims' families were like, obviously happy they don't have to go through this like execution, stay of execution, whatever. But they're like, but
Hmm.
we didn't get justice. Like,
Yeah.
he just died. Like, we didn't, it's not the
It's
same as
different.
like, yeah, which is hard.
Yeah. And that is the fast food killer and the murders of Sarah Jackson, Steve Hampton, Andrea Brown, Ronald Santiago, Robert Sewell, Angela Holmes, and Michelle Mace, and the attempted murder of Jose Antonio Ramirez Gonzalez.
And God knows how many more crimes.
Yeah, yeah. Just
Like,
what a,
terrible person from just the
yeah.
day he was
I'm like, I
born,
don't even know how
honestly.
to describe this man,
Like, not to be harsh, but I mean,
but clearly there was something missing all along here with this guy.
yeah, just just rough and just so
Hmm.
tragic. Like, again, like most of these, like Steve Hampton was 25. Like, most of these people were in their 20s or younger. Like, these were
Hmm.
just young people with like this whole life ahead of them
Yeah,
that was just taken. And like the book also talks about like the ripple effects, like for the family members who were like,
absolutely.
how hard it was for them, growing up
Hmm.
with this like huge loss. So it's sad.
And just like so many, like we said, like teenagers who were just working like an after school job, like trying to save
Hmm.
up money for a car or spending money or whatever. And as parents, it's like, oh, you want your kid to like be responsible and like have their first job and things like
Hmm.
that. And just truly horrific. I mean,
Yeah.
well, we hope you guys have enjoyed this first case back after our break, first case of 2025, which we started this podcast. Why did that sound so weird coming out of my mouth?
5 years ago?
5 years ago. We started this podcast in 2020, so we are coming up on our fifth
5 years.
anniversary.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Like we
crazy.
said earlier, we have a whole bunch of episodes to get caught up on if you
Yeah.
guys are new here.
Yeah.
With that being said, Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week is, again, we were gone for a while, so I had some crazy things happen in life. But my perk of the week is that I have a functioning, working main sewer line.
Yes.
So, little
Which tells you
backstory, you
for a
guys.
while it was not.
Yeah. So, a little backstory. Obviously, we bought the house and we were so happy. And then we started noticing a little toilet gurgle. We ran the washing
Hmm.
machine, which didn't seem like normal to me. Um, we had a lot of ups and downs, but basically, our main sewer line, the pipes were from the war. The war. So very old pipe that basically just turned to eggshell and crushed underneath everything.
Hmm.
So a lot of ups and downs, a lot of thought it was going to be covered by a warranty, wasn't. long story short, it got replaced. And in the meantime, there were a lot of like little happy things that happened. Like our plumber was amazing. The
Hmm.
excavation company was amazing, where they were like, we're going to get this fixed for you right away. KUB, our local utility, was amazing. They showed up like 7:30 the next day to dig up our road. That's how severe this was. The road had to be dug up. Um, our neighbor who has like the house is a rental house, so it was vacant, like let us use his like restroom facilities because nothing could go down a drain. We were hand
Hmm.
washing dishes in tubs. My mom was doing my laundry. Like it was, we were down bad for a little
Yeah.
bit. But everyone was like so kind, so nice. We got it fixed, and now we can do 7 loads of laundry in a row, and there's no toilet gurgling, there's no sewage in our tub.
Isn't that
Like
a wonderful
we can take
feeling? You're like, I can just
showers, we
run
can,
whatever water I want and it's
yeah,
fine.
it's just so nice. It's one of those things that you never think about until you have
Hmm.
to think about it,
Yeah.
where you're like, oh, I can't do anything. Like you have to hand wash dishes in a tub, and then you
Yeah.
keep having to empty the tub because you're getting like food particles because you can't rinse the dishes because nothing can go down the drain. Like it's extreme, okay?
Which
Um,
goes back to the beginning of this episode where we talked about finding the good in the bad. And
yeah.
you so beautifully did that, talking about how nice everyone was.
Yeah, and that's really like what got us like by is was
Hmm.
just again looking at the like bright of it because like it's a
Hmm.
shitty situation, but like Kevin and I like handled it well, which again
Hmm.
showed that we are good together
Hmm.
during conflict, not between us, but with something going on. Like we
Yeah.
weren't fighting, like we were, tackling as a team. So, and those pipes are gonna last longer than I will. So they better. And also our water line wasn't done correctly. It's all new. So our water line should be good. Everything is brand spanking new. I got
See,
the
what a good
cleanest,
positive.
newest pipes
Yes.
on the whole block. But yes, so that that is my perk of the week. And if anyone's in Knoxville and wants to come to my seating party in the spring for my yard, you're more than welcome. Uh, but in all seriousness, that's my perk of the week. It's like a working sewer line,
Yeah.
It's important. And if you are going to buy a house, find someone to check your sewer line. Just ask about it.
Yeah.
Just ask because it doesn't show up on an inspection, apparently. Just ask if they know. Because if not, it might cost you $8,000. Anyway,
Yes.
that's my perk of the week. Jacqueline, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week, I wanted to shout out two books that I've read that were super good recently. So the first one I just finished last night, which I stayed up way too late reading, which I should not do when I have a newborn and will be up the rest of the night anyway, but I did it. But it was Husbands and Lovers by Beatrice Williams. I love her. I love everything she's ever written. This one also did not
Yeah,
disappoint.
she's incredible.
Yes, it was very good. And also, back a couple weeks ago, I read Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. So that one was also very, very good. Both are historical fiction, which is my favorite genre. And
Hmm.
they were both just really well done and very interesting, and was just a big fan of them. So definitely recommend those. Wanted to shout out those two books.
I'm shocked you didn't shout out our most recent book club book. It was really bad, guys.
It was
I'm not going to
so
say it on
bad.
here. Just if you want to know, DM us. We'll tell you what book it was. But
I truly think it may have
um,
been the worst book I've ever read in my entire life. And I read a
it's
lot
up
of books
there.
in my life, and I think it might be the number one worst book. So that's an
Yeah,
achievement in and of itself.
I DNF'd it for non-readers. I did not finish it. I
Yeah.
skipped to the chapter that everyone talked about on the internet. I read it, and then I went to Goodreads and
Chucked
said
it.
remove from shelf. So, yeah. If you want to tell us about the books you're reading, about if you tell me about your house issues, because nothing makes me feel better than like when I talk about it and someone's like, well, when I moved in, this happened to my house, because it
Yep.
just makes you feel better to know you're not alone
Yeah.
in the struggle. Tell me about that. Tell us, I don't know, how your holidays went, how you're feeling post inauguration. We're here with you. We're here to support you.
Hmm.
You can do all that. It's in the show notes, all of our places. Our most important place is patreon.com/caffeinated crimes, where you got this episode 2 weeks early. And there are so many bonuses there. We already said you're taking forever to catch up. more like 50 more episodes you can catch up on. A Discord channel, just a lot of perks there. You can get a
Hmm.
pin sticker at certain levels, all of that. Yeah, patreon.com/caffeinated crimes. And if you could give us 5 stars on Spotify and Apple or anywhere that has a rating
I
system,
was like, there's something
um,
else I was supposed to say.
I got you. I
I'm
got you.
just
Um,
staring at Courtney like a deer in headlights, like, please
I
help
was I
me.
was I was giving you a little, I was like waiting for the
And I
reaction. I
was
was
I
like,
was
does
like,
she remember?
it's there, it's just not quite. I know it's
Yeah.
something, but I can't remember what it is. It's been a while, guys.
Yeah, just anywhere that has a rating system, we would love a good rating on YouTube, a like, a subscribe, anything like that, a positive comment. We always appreciate it. But in the meantime, go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.